Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends from the media, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this conference on Need for an Effective Strategy on Kashmir, organized by Tillotoma Foundation. This is a part of the Strategic Insights Seminar Series 2021. I am Soham Das, Director of Tillotoma Foundation. Tillotoma Foundation works globally in the areas of international relations, financial, environmental, scientific, strategic, and defense policy. Last year, we hosted a series of strategic insights sessions. In this new year, we are very happy to once again begin this strategic insights seminar series with this conference on an extremely important topic. I must thank everyone who has supported us in making this possible. We have a stellar panel this evening. We will have an in-depth understanding and analysis of the strategic aspects that are at play in the situation in Kashmir from the excellent panel of eminent speakers at this conference. We all know that Kashmir recently held the District Development Commission elections peacefully, but some major security challenges remain. Development gets hampered due to the security situation in Jammu and Kashmir. We will look at these major challenges, including insurgency, terrorism, etc., from a policy perspective and try to deliberate on the way forward. The keynote speech at this conference will be delivered by Mr. A.S. Dulat, former Chief of Prof and Special Director of Intelligence Bureau. Post-retirement, he was the advisor on Kashmir to the PMO from 2000 to 2004. He is the author of the book Kashmir, the Vajpayee Years. The other distinguished and eminent speakers are Lieutenant General Gurmit Singh, former Deputy Chief of Army Staff. He was also the Additional Director General of Military Operations and Corps Commander Srinagar. Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, Chancellor of the Central University of Kashmir and former Military Secretary, Indian Army. He is also a member of the National Disaster Management Authority. Professor Amitabh Mattoo, who was awarded the Padma Shri in 2008, is a former Vice Chancellor of University of Jammu and former cabinet-ranked advisor of the government of Jammu and Kashmir. He was also a visiting professor at Stanford University. Ms. Temina Rizvi, activist, policy researcher, and CEO, Jammu and Kashmir Policy Institute. She delivered a strong and optimistic message on Kashmir at the sidelines of the UNHRC meeting in Geneva in March 2020. I sincerely thank all of you for being here with us. I look forward to hearing your erudite discussion. The discussion today would be moderated by Mr. Jitendra Kumar Oja, Distinguished Fellow and Head National Security and Strategic Studies Division of Tillotoma Foundation. He is a geopolitical and national security analyst. He's an alumnus of Presidency College, Kolkata, and has worked as a civil servant in Government of India for 26 years, mostly in the Cabinet Secretariat and the MEA, before retiring from the rank of Joint Secretary. Post-retirement, he has written and lectured extensively on various aspects of national security, governance, geopolitics, and irregular warfare. Some of his write-ups on Kashmir have received wide attention. Let me inform the audience some basic house rules. When we take questions, please keep your comments or questions to within a minute. You can also send your questions and comments in a written format using the chat option. Keep your audios on mute when you're not speaking. Thank you so much, everyone. Once again, let me now request Mr. Jitendra Kumar Oja, Distinguished Fellow, Tillotoma Foundation, to deliver the conference vision and take the conference forward.
Thank you very much, Soham. It's a great day in the history of Tillotoma Foundation. We have such a panel of distinguished speakers, particularly Shri A.S. Dulat. He is very often referred as Bhishma Pitama of security in India. Sir, we are indeed very honored and delighted to have you. We are equally honored to have all the other panelists, particularly to distinguished military generals, former Deputy Chief of Indian Army, and General Hasnain. We are equally honored to have Professor Mattoo, and Ms. Temina represents the voice of youth, and as a young woman, she has made her mark from the valley, and she has gained a lot of attention. There will be a lot of concern on why we are organizing an event like this at this point of time. I must clarify at the outset that we have no backers. We are not working as proxy of anyone. We are very clear that Kashmir is a very critical component of India's national security framework, and it needs an apolitical perspective. It needs a perspective of professionals and intellectuals who know the subject very well. So we have deliberately kept away politicians. We look forward to 3 or 4 major issues. We recognize that, yes, Pakistan is a factor, and how to break, I would say, both resolve and capacity of Pakistan. But at the same time, we can't blame everything on Pakistan. An efficient governance is equally required. We are emerging as a major power. And as a major power, it does not look nice that we have a conflict going on for such a long time. Yes, we have come a long way from early 1990s or mid 1990s when there were proxies of foreign powers, when we had a large segment of our population which was thrown out of the valley, and Indian state appeared somewhat helpless. Today, Indian state appears very strong. But we already keep noticing a lot of motivated propaganda and a lot of concern as well. Even in Western media, there has been a lot of propaganda that Indian state is treating its minorities in a very bad way in Kashmir. Yes, there is a concern. I would believe that this is an irregular warfare, and moment such kind of warfare prolongs, the moment it prolongs for such a long time, some degree of curtailment of civil liberties are inevitable, and these happen to alienate people. But whatever it is, we recognize that a cohesive and vibrant India is very critical for this region, not only for 1.3 billion people of India, but also, I would say, for normal citizens of Pakistan. This will act as both, I would say, antidote to Islamic radicalism as well as Chinese authoritarianism. And I would say that this would also assure normal citizens over there, because a strong India would somehow compel these two states to give some concessions to their own citizens as well. So on these notes, how to go forward, what can be done? We would not focus on battle tactics or military strategies, government of the day and security forces. They know it much better. But what should be the strategy? And on these, ladies and gentlemen, we solicit your kind views. May I request Shri A. Dulat to begin his keynote address.
Thank you very much. Indeed honored, privileged, and all the wonderful things that have been said, that I was so and so and so and so and so and so. Let me make it very clear that whatever I say or I'm going to say today is purely my own personal views, mine and mine alone. The other things, you know, whether I wrote a book or whether I served a long time in the agencies or after that with, fortunately, with Prime Minister Vajpayee, has nothing to do with my views today. And so, as I said, these are my views, and I hope people who disagree will disagree, but that's how it is. You know, when we talk of Kashmir, I think the million-dollar question, or the question which always arises, is that do we have a Kashmir policy? Have we ever had a Kashmir policy? And when I try and look within, or when I try and think about this thing, I don't think we've had a Kashmir policy, or nothing which has been clearly laid out. So things have just happened, and they keep happening in Kashmir. Now, and we call them watersheds. The Kashmiris like to call them, or they like to say that they are at the crossroads of this, that, and the other. So whether you call it a crossroad or watersheds, there have been watersheds. And the latest watershed has been the abrogation of Article 370 on the 5th of August 2019. And we are still struggling with that issue, whether it's right, wrong, how it will play out, and what its repercussions will be. But let me say that, you know, my own view is that there was nothing left of 370. 370 was a very hollow provision. I described it some time back as a fig leaf for the Kashmiris. And so the question then arises is that did we need to at all abrogate it if there was nothing there? And now, having abrogated it, how much of an impact does it make? Again, in my own view, I think 370 now is done and dusted. It's not going to come back. no matter how many petitions in the Supreme Court or whatever. I don't see 370 coming back. But there are so many other related issues with it. But before that, let me go back a bit to a little bit to history. Whether we start at 1947 or 52 or 53, there have been watersheds. And I think the 5th of August, 1953 was a watershed, the arrest of Sheikh Abdullah. And it remains till date a controversial issue. That was it necessary? Was it necessary to arrest Sheikh Saab at that point of time? And I will only quote here what Mr. B.N. Malik writes in his book on Kashmir, that as you would know, our first Union Home Minister was Rajaji or Sri Rajgopalachari. And Mr. Malik says when, after Rajaji left Delhi and went to Madras, as it was then called, that when Mr. Malik met Rajaji in Madras or in Chennai, as we call it now, Rajaji asked him that, why did we have to shut the door on Sheikh? And now, he said, we'll never have peace in Kashmir. And I think those were prophetic words in a sense, because I think that is where the erosion of 370 actually begins. There are many other watersheds, that we could talk about. In course of time, Sheikh Abdullah himself was to make peace with Delhi, to compromise with Delhi. And the 75 Accord led to, the real mainstreaming of Kashmir. And Sheikh himself contributed to it. So if there is anything in Delhi's way of handling Kashmir, I would say that the one consistency that we have had, or we've tried to have in Kashmir, is to try and gradually mainstream Kashmir over a period of time. And I think that is one area in which we have, by and large, succeeded. If you take the situation as it was in 47 or 52 or even 53, and what we have today, it's, Kashmir has been mainstream. And even the so-called separatists that have existed from time to time, and they have existed in the form of the Hurriyat after 1992, are more or less taken care of now. I'm not saying that each and every person who believes in separatism has been properly dealt with or disposed of, but by and large, separatism is not a worrisome problem as of today. Then we come to another watershed, which was the 1987 election, and which led to a lot of bloodshed post 1989. And in December 1989, we had the unfortunate kidnapping of the daughter of the Union Home Minister, Rubia Syed. That again, to my mind, is a watershed. It gave the Kashmiris or the JKLF at that point in time, the youngsters, a belief that maybe Azadi could be possible or Delhi could be challenged, that if the Soviet Union could be pushed out of Afghanistan, then why could Delhi not be pushed out or India not be pushed out of Kashmir? So, and then we've had a period of comparative peace from, I would say, 1996 to 2007 or 2008, when things by and large were peaceful. Varying degrees, but by and large peaceful. And I think another great moment or another watershed moment is 9/11. You know, this was, in a sense, America's Pearl Harbor all over again, but much more serious. But it changed a lot of things all over the world. And one has to admit that it favored us because I remember meeting Robin Raphael, who was used to be at one point of time Assistant Secretary of State in the United States dealing with South Asia. And she gave us a lot of grief in the early 1990s when when terrorism, in a sense, was at its peak in Kashmir, and the Americans insisted on referring to them as freedom fighters. And we were together at a conference in Istanbul, and I said to her, I said, you know, you caused us a lot of problems. And she says, no, it wasn't me, it was the United States. So I think a lot changed in the United States thinking after 9/11. And as you would recall, that was the time that General Musharraf was also read the Riot Act by George Bush and told that either you are with us or you are against us. And he had to join the war against terror. And that did help us. And that did help, I would say, Prime Minister Vajpayee in particular, because Prime Minister Vajpayee, I had the privilege of watching or being closely connected with him for 5.5 years. He did believe that this permanent confrontation with Pakistan has to end. And in Kashmir, we need to move forward. And that is why, despite reservations within the party or whatever, he took that bus to Lahore in February 99. So, and Vajpayee has been remembered and revered in Kashmir for a long time because of his famous words of Insaniyat, Jamhuriyat, Kashmiriyat. And it's ironical that when the NDA comes back to power in 2014, and we have another BJP government led by Modi ji, that the Kashmiris actually welcome it. No less a person than the Mirwais welcomed it, because he felt that this would be a continuation of the process that Prime Minister Vajpayee had begun. But that was not to be. In between, lest I forget, we also had Dr. Manmohan Singh, who tried his very best to make peace with Pakistan. And as he said while demitting office, that India and Pakistan were on the verge of signing a settlement on Kashmir. And if that is so, then my belief is it would have given us about 15 years or so of peace in Kashmir, if not permanent peace. So that is how it has been. And again, coming back to 2001 and 9/11, I remember then talking to some of because I was engaged with the separatist leadership, and I remember talking to one of the senior separatist leaders, and I said, what do you now have to think? What do you now have to think about Pakistan? And he said, what can we expect from Pakistan? They can't protect themselves, so how are they going to protect us? And I think that is a point at which Pakistan's influence in Kashmir, which Mr. Oja referred to, and which is a fact, has been dwindling. And Pakistan itself has come to realize, I think, that there is not too much to be gained out of Kashmir now. They've milked this cow long enough. At the same time, this will always depend on the manner in which we deal with Kashmir. when there is peace in Kashmir, when the Kashmiri is satisfied, there is hardly any role for Pakistan. But when the Kashmiri is dissatisfied, then willy-nilly, in some way or another, Pakistan comes back into the game again. And that is what we are seeing today. That we may not have the Jaish-e-Mohammed, we may not have the Lashkar-e-Toiba the way it was. There may be new names, but there's no doubt that terrorism continues. And it's continuing, it's coming from across. And unfortunately, more and more of our own boys, particularly in South Kashmir, are getting involved. And these boys are getting involved, again, not hoping for Azadi, not even for Pakistan, but now in the name of Allah. So we are also witnessing radicalization of Kashmir. And when we come to the abrogation of 370, I remember Kashmiris telling me that, we've always had problems with Delhi. But Kashmir or the Kashmiris have never had problems with the people of India. Why have the Indian people now forsaken us? And one has to admit that post 5th of August 2019, not many people have spoken up for the Kashmiris. And the only person I can remember who made a passionate speech in Parliament was our former Union Home Minister, Mr. Chidambaram. Other than that, hardly anybody has shed any tears for the abrogation of 370. So if 370 has to go, and as I see it, I think it's gone, why did we have to belittle Kashmir to the extent of creating, a union territory out of a state? This is the first time in the history of India that a state has been reduced to a union territory. In the past, union territories have been promoted to states. So it's a slightly sad state of affairs that we are witnessing in Kashmir. And my belief is that, militancy, terrorism, this is not going to go away on its own. And the Kashmiri, if there is one reason that he still looks at Pakistan, is because he feels that if India and Pakistan were to talk, if India and Pakistan were to engage, then there is some hope for the Kashmiri. But I think since, when Pathankot happened, I'm forgetting now, about 5 years ago, engagement between India and Pakistan has come to a complete halt. Whether this helps us or not is very difficult to say. But I do believe that time is of the essence. If we had a better relationship with Pakistan, if we were talking, and if there was a continuous engagement with Pakistan, I think dealing with 370 might have been easier. My own argument is that today, I think the mainstream leadership, Mehbooba ji doesn't admit it, and I don't blame her. And now the National Conference doesn't admit it. And the new alliance, the PAGD, doesn't admit it, that they would be happy with 370 gone. But the reality is that by and large, people understand that 370 is not going to come back, however much you fight it in the Supreme Court. Now, if the Kashmiri were to accept that, then what possible objection could Pakistan have? As it is, there are people in Pakistan who feel that the Pakistan government has let down Kashmir and Kashmiris at this very crucial, vital point of time. But I come back to Musharraf's old formula and what he used to say repeatedly time and time again, that whatever is acceptable to Kashmir and Kashmiris would be acceptable to Pakistan. So quoting Musharraf, I would say that if the Kashmiri were to accept abrogation of Article 370, then I think there would be very little argument left in Pakistan in favor of 370. But this is all in the air because we are not talking to Pakistan and we need to talk to Pakistan. And ultimately, because Kashmir is not a military issue, it's not even a law and order problem. It is a political issue, and more than that, it is an emotive issue. And the Kashmiri is highly emotive. So I think common sense says that we have two large, big neighbors on the east and west, and we should be at least on the right side, or we should be at least engaging all the time with at least one of the two, which is not happening at this point of time. And this reminds me of something that my friend and old former colleague Sudhendra Kulkarni wrote recently. He said that he argued that India and Pakistan should join together to contain China. I thought that was a very interesting proposition. Whether the two of us can get together and contain China, or we will get together, but it's something which needs. The point he was trying to make is that it is very important for India and Pakistan to engage. And I think it is equally important for Delhi to never stop engaging with Srinagar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We sincerely appreciate the kind of perspective Shri Dulat offered us. I would also like to clarify, we want this discussion to go on with in a very frank and forthright way. Each of the speakers are free to express their views, and we have carefully chosen this panel that we can have a multitude of views, and we do not have any view. Foundation does not have any view as such. So we are grateful for this enlightening perspective. May I now invite Professor Mattoo to come out with his presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oja. It's a great pleasure to be here, and especially in this distinguished audience. Normally, when I have a Zoom class, I request everyone to mute their audios but unmute their videos so that I can see the people who are behind the black screens. Now, Dulat Saab is used to having people behind screens, but I am not. I would rather see who I'm talking to. So perhaps may I request your distinguished participants to reveal their identities behind their names so that I can engage with them, as you said, in all candor and more frankly than may be the case without that happening. Let me begin with something that Dulat Saab said, which I think that goes to the nub of the issue, that there are essentially two problems of Kashmir. One is within Kashmir and one is off Kashmir. Within Kashmir, it's been a problem of New Delhi's relationship with Srinagar, Srinagar's relationship with Jammu and Leh, and then you have had the relationship between New Delhi and Islamabad, and also put in a larger geopolitical context. But whenever you've been able to manage the internal situation, the external situation has rarely been able to have any impact. The longest period of sustained peace in some ways was before Dulat Saab's friend Dr. Farooq Abdullah 1987 famous election, was the period between Shimla and those elections. And that was because after Shimla, New Delhi was able to arrive at a settlement internally as well as externally. In fact, Shimla is a good peg. I wanted to begin even earlier, but Shimla is always a good peg because it's reviled in the media. Everyone who talks about Shimla talks about the follies of Shimla, talks about how Mrs. Gandhi and her advisors, most of whom were brilliant Kashmiri Pandits, let down India. That if you had been able to secure what Manik Shah was able to achieve on the battlefront into reality at Shimla, the history, the narrative of India-Pakistan relationships and Kashmir was different. Let me, however, disagree fundamentally. I think Shimla was tactically and strategically perhaps the most important initiative. First of all, of course, Shimla followed the most extraordinary victory of India in a war. It remains, Kargil notwithstanding, the most extraordinary victory under the overall leadership of General Manik Shah and Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, who was GOC&C Eastern Command. We dismembered Pakistan. Pakistan had been called by Jinnah as a geographical monstrosity, but we actually created or helped to create the Mukti Bahani. We assisted, aided the Bengali, disaffected Bengali population into creating a new country. That hadn't happened since the Cold War. But what you did after that was also to arrive at a summit meeting in Simla, despite the fact that Bhutto had that famous temper tantrum in the UN Security Council where he tore up the resolution and walked away from the Security Council. You invited him and his daughter. And at Shimla, what did you arrive at? Essentially an acceptance, a de facto acceptance of the status quo, that the line of control would eventually become the international border, and that Simla would be, whatever issues remained bilaterally, whatever issues remained outstanding between India and Pakistan, including Kashmir, would be dealt with bilaterally. The two pegs or the two issues on which India had been consistently on the back front, whether it was a question of the LOC or whether it is a question of bilateralism, were achieved at Simla. And of course, people say that you could have asked for a written settlement on rather than a de facto understanding. But the reality was, and obviously the counterfactual is never a good question to ask in history. The fact is that if Bhutto had left Simla without signing an agreement, what would he have had? Some territory and 100,000 Pakistani prisoners who were going to become, who were already a liability. I mean, those prisoners couldn't have translated into huge political dividends. In other words, what was achieved in Simla, I think, was an absolute victory for India, because that victory was translated also into an accord with Sheikh Abdullah. Sheikh Abdullah, and according to Dr. Farooq Abdullah, Sheikh Abdullah, before he signed on the accord with Mrs. Gandhi, or before his number two, Beg, signed the accord with Partha Sarthi, sent Farooq to Pakistan, and there Bhutto told him, yes, the similar understanding is that what is yours, what is ours is ours. Sheikh Abdullah, even his greatest adversary in the valley, will admit was the most popular leader in 20th century Kashmir. More importantly, he had resisted any compromise since 53 to 75. Here is an agreement, first of all, you sign with Pakistan which reduces Kashmir to a bilateral issue, and then you sign an accord with the most popular leader of Kashmir, Sheikh Abdullah. And you sign an accord where there is no give. If you look at the accord, the 5-point accord, even on the issue of nomenclature, where Sheikh Abdullah wants to be referred to as the Wazir-e-Azam rather than just the Wazir-e-Ala, there's no give. Sure, there are some residuary powers which are returned, but eventually all the changes, constitutional changes that have been made since 53 remain intact. So 70, it's this similar accord which needs to be studied more carefully if we have to move forward in Jammu and Kashmir, because in some ways, and I was there as a school student in 74, 75, when Sheikh Abdullah came back after the accord with coming from Jammu. And I, in my memory, and I have seen crowds in India and other places, I have never ever seen a crowd which welcomed Sheikh Abdullah back to the valley after being sworn in as chief minister once again. Whatever one might say with hindsight, that moment has never been repeated. Perhaps except at the funeral. I didn't see Sheikh Abdullah's funeral, but Dulat Sahab may remember that. But in terms of the welcome after signing the accord, today, what can you do in some ways to address many of the challenges that Dulat Sahab pointed out? I think both externally and internally, the calm, the uneasy calm that exists today may be short-lived. Diplomatically, you have a Biden-Harris victory, and you will have, whether you like it or not, congressmen who will raise issues regarding our internal issues. Dulat Sahab and his colleagues may have to send people again to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. So it will be a repeat of the 90s again in many ways. But more importantly, these are going to become, even though we are no longer the India of the 90s, but these bilateral issues will become irritants, and may have an impact overall on the atmospherics of the Washington, D.C. relationship. Now, whether the resistance front is, how much support it has from Pakistan remains to be seen, but there is quite clearly, if Pakistan is acting cagily, it is for a reason, and I think sooner or later they will up the ante. So internally, you need to do more. You cannot, and I'm a realist in that sense, you cannot ever go back into time. What you need to do is to rebuild many of the initiatives which have been part of this narrative. People who look at Jammu and Kashmir from 47 to 90 to 2020 will understand that, for instance, this peg on which you can build is the peg that Mr. Oja, that you referred to, which is the district development elections. If that is one expression of democratic mobilization that you saw, you could build on that to have quick elections to the Legislative Assembly, a return to statehood, and other measures measures to ensure that there is a sense of greater empowerment and participation within Jammu and Kashmir. On issues of governance, which I think both of you, Dulat Sahab, raised, I must say that till Mr. Manoj Sinha came, there were serious issues of a governance deficit. These are issues that you can and must address. Third is that you have to, whether it is the mainstream parties or the other organizations, whether it's in Jammu or Srinagar, I think a dialogue, and I think this is something, of course, Dulat Saab has often referred to in many books of his, and there are others who have participated in it. And I see Nur Mohammad Baba Saab here also, who was my old teacher. Baba Saab, you can show us your face so that I can say a salam to you at least. But a dialogue can hurt no one, because you can never trade off issues of land, territory, people's sovereignty on a dialogue table. So it's important to keep people engaged. But more importantly, I think it is important to have domain experts, people with knowledge, understanding, sensitivity, become much more uh, relevant to policy making. And I'm glad that a forum based out of Kolkata and Mr. Soham Das, I congratulate you that you have been able to get a galaxy of people here, including General Gurmit Singh and, of course, Mr. Dulat and General Hasnain and others on this one table. But don't stop at that. Let this be, and also Madam Tahmina Rizvi, who I haven't had the pleasure of seeing or hearing before. But I think it's important to continue with this process so that you bring real stakeholders in forums like this. But I would am naturally positive, but also extremely cautious. And I suspect that the uneasy calm that prevails in Jammu and Kashmir may be short-lived unless we act with the same kind of alacrity that we did whenever there was a crisis that addressed us. And perhaps it's time to look back at agreements like Simla and the period of Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh and draw the right lessons from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Mattoo. We really understand your concerns, and it is certainly time for everybody, every stakeholder in this issue to be aware of it, because things suddenly change in a situation like this, and we are already hearing very negative voices internationally, efforts to rather see some of the loyalists of President-elect Biden, and particularly human rights lobby in United States, taking not a very charitable position. But yes, integration of Kashmir is very critical, but integrations are always based on, I would say, endurable goodwills rather than any perceived coercion, even if the coercion may not be there. So may I now request General Gurmit Singh, former Deputy Chief of Indian Army, to kindly share his perspective. He has served in Valley for over a decade. Very concerned about people. He said how he tried to reach out to people, and always Indian Army, we have to give them credit that in a conflict which has gone on for such a long time, the level of alienation is almost negligible, very little. Of course, there are concerns, other issues Dulat Saab highlighted, but we are very proud of Indian Army, the way they have conducted themselves, and General Gurmit has been on the forefront. Please, sir, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Firstly, it's an honor and a pleasure to be on the platform of Tillotoma Foundation. And first of all, my Jai Hind to you. The very word Jai Hind, which I've said now, actually says that for me, nation first and one nation, one India is the priority. In fact, I'm deeply aware of the aspect that we need to focus on the effective strategy on Kashmir for Kashmir. So therefore, I have planned that I'll be covering the challenges, some of the profound changes which have taken place recently in the recent times, the status of things, solution, and mainly the strategies. First, looking at the challenges, I think having been in the valley for almost 10 plus years, 10 years, and been a soldier for last 40 years, and visited Pakistan twice. And this is one topic where very passionately and deeply looks for a solution on this very difficult arena and a priority for nation. When I look at the Awam and the society in Kashmir, to me, the biggest challenge is the radicalization which the Awam has gone through. Every Friday, every mosque meeting, majority of the utterance by the those who are part of the radicalization. So what has been the damage? In fact, that's one problem which we have to tackle. I very humbly feel that there's a requirement for social re-engineering. When I say social re-engineering, that means that there is a requirement of some social reformer who should come on the horizon of Kashmir and repair many of the cultural and social aspects of it. The peer pressure on a common Kashmiri, the threat of a normal neighbor, always under a threat that which neighbor will go and tell the terrorists or the security forces or somebody else. Some negative influences, the threat of terror, and the radicalized segment of the society. That has been a biggest challenge, and there is a requirement of social re-engineering, which brings up the importance of women, mothers especially, and the youth. There is also a requirement, I would say, of the cognitive domain. If I say सोच और विचार का जो इलाका है, what is the narrative? What is the nation's thought? What's the nation direction? And what is the nation's commitment? I think that has got to be told in very clear terms. In fact, I would say that in the battle of perceptions, perspective, and its fight against the myth, lies, and propaganda, that's another challenge. Actually, when one looks at the solution area, most of the solution are in the area of RE, that is a reconstruction, remold, or in the D, to de-learn. In fact, from the security perspective, it's a very complex challenge for the nation, and specifically for Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir. When I look at the Ladakh, the challenge of LAC, the challenge of Siachen, Gilgit-Baltistan, and Aksai-Chin, 4 major challenges. When I look at the LOC, we have the challenge of terrorism and the POK. In fact, the expansionism and the collusiveness which China has taken the track on, and with the Pakistan on illegal occupation of POK, Gilgit-Baltistan, and terrorism, this makes a full package of challenges for us. And in the CPC intentions, it's a challenge from both China and Pakistan. In fact, the security and the military challenge of Kashmir actually started from 22nd October 1947. We got to take the entire environment back to where they started on 22 October 1947. And the proxy war and the terror which they unleashed since 1989, I think that is what needs to be reversed. There has to be, the conditions have to be created within Pakistan that they reverse what they adopted in 1989. I would say that there are certain fundamental aspects. When I say fundamental, this relates to the aspect of sovereignty and territorial integrity of nation. They can't be compromised on sovereignty at all. So how can China plan a China-Pakistan economic corridor through the area which belongs to us? In fact, the POK, Pakistan remaining in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan is also a challenge to our sovereignty. The terrorism card which Pakistan has played for so long, it has been one way, but I think not only that it has got to stop this one way, it has got to be reversed also. Not only reversed, I think that Pakistan has got to get into, we need to ensure that they get into the strategic reversal and drop this terrorism card. I would say that all this said can only be done once the capability, capacity, and the skills from not only military point of view, but all elements of power as a nation have got to be done comprehensively. Now I'd like to look at what are the hard changes which have taken place. In fact, we talk too often about history. We try to sit in the old mold and the thoughts as far as Kashmir is concerned. But I think we need to look focusedly on what are the hard changes which have taken place. In fact, I would say some of the hard decisions and the hard actions which have been taken recently, like surgical strike, which was done in September 2016. We've been doing some of the surgical strikes earlier, but to the level and the way it was pronounced and the way it was told as a nation was something totally different. Balakot airstrike, I think this was a very important decision taken by India. First time since independence that Indian Air Force crossed the border and targeted Pakistan's terror camp. And number of admission, Kabulnamas, which are coming from there, have confirmed the effect that it had. Then what happened on 5th August 2019 on the abrogation of Article 370 and bifurcation of erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territory, I think that was one of the most strategical, historical step which has been taken. I personally felt that the absurdity, duplicity of two constitutions, two flags within the nation, this goes against the principle of nation first and one nation. I think that was corrected. Then on 6th August, very categorically, a red line was indicated that POK and Gilgit-Baltistan will be taken back. I think that's an excellent red line which has been told so profoundly, and therefore we need to make that happen through our capability, capacity, and the skills. Thereafter, 31st October, formation of the two union territories, and November 2019, when Survey of India issued that map. In fact, that map, if you look at the map of the Leh, it is clear that we have a boundary of 136 kilometers with Afghanistan. Pakistan and China have got no border amongst themselves. And it's clear assertion of what our intentions are as far as excision is concerned. I think this environment of hard decision, resolve, and expression of national will is something which is a realistic aspect as on today. Let's not talk about history. That time has gone, as Amitabh ji said. And I would say that the current distancing that we've done from Pakistan, that we will not talk until the terror stops from there. I think this is the right way. In the overall distancing that we've done in the COVID times, I think this was the best distancing that we've been maintaining in these times of terrorism emanating from Pakistan. Pakistan, despite all that it has been trying to indicate to FATF, it has not shifted from its center of gravity of terrorism. Now let's look at the status. What is the status at this moment? Because the current moment is the best moment to put the edifice of the solution or the strategies that we need to have. I would say the current time and the geopolitical situation and the environment is on our side, and the right time to take hard decision and execute hard strategies on the ground. Pakistan is in the worst case scenario. It has sunk on many fronts. It has sunk as far as the diplomacy is concerned. It has sunk as far as the economics is concerned. It has been distanced by the Muslim world, the Islamic world, and the way it has brought itself to the nadir of debt, loan, and borrowing because of the dependence on China. This is in the worst state as at the moment. And also within Pakistan, the level, the way the governance, administration has dropped down, and the opposition, the way Pakistan is having internal problems, I think this is a moment where we can find a permanent solution or a better solution as far as Kashmir is concerned. I would say even China in this current moment of the effect and the impact of what they did in reference to the COVID and the blame which goes on to them because of Wuhan and handling of this COVID-19 is also one of the factors which actually indicates to us that we must take hard decision in the current moments. The belligerence and all front activation by the China and the way the China-US relations are at the moment also adds and suggests that this is the time when India can take a hard decision. And I think the best thing which has happened at the moment is that after 5th August 2019, now it is a center-led. The accountability is on the nation. The accountability is on all government approach. The accountability is on all ministries. So we need to rise as a nation, as a one nation, to ensure that we look for the solution and implement the strategies that we need to have for Kashmir. While looking at the solution, I think the most important solution that we need to have, actually, to be very honest, having spent more than 10 years in Kashmir, the heart really goes to the Awam. They have suffered the maximum. In fact, they have suffered because of Pakistan, they suffered because of terrorism, and they suffered because of neglect of governance and administration. In fact, to be very honest, I think one of the most important solutions at the moment is governance and administration, which was lacking for a very long time. And I'm very happy the initiative which the government has taken, which the center has taken, which the Lieutenant Governor out there has taken, they are on the right lines. All our actions have got to be Awam-centric. I think that is the most important aspect of it. In fact, to be very honest, as a commander, from the brigade commander level till the corps commander, one was absolutely focused that our every action must be Awam oriented. It must be friendly approach. We must go out of our way to provide the succor to the Awam. I think it is very important that we go to dominate the cognitive domain, the way people think, their perceptions, their narratives, their thinking. In fact, last so many years, they have suffered on this account. They've been radicalized. They've been put in the arena of fear by everybody. I would say even the environment of a cordon and search is an environment of a fear. The environment of restrictions and the control, restrictions on the roads and the villages and the movement has also been an arena where the Awam has suffered the maximum. I think the most important is the employment, education, business, industry. That is what needs to be focused at this moment. And biggest, I think, challenge is how to keep Pakistan away, how to keep Pakistan effect away, how to keep those people away who are pro-Pakistan, who are anti-India, who still are sailing in the Pakistan proxy and lobbies. Those people who think, who have separatism in their mind, those people who were the part and parcel of the terrorist organization, they have to be kept away. Even if we got to put a restriction on them, we have to control them until and unless they change. And most important aspect is the political environment must change. The new mold of the political thinking must come up. I think that is what is most important at this juncture. One thing is clear, the hard problems need hard decisions. Hard decisions are only on the resolve and the national will, and that is what is required. But are we ready with our narrative? I think narrative is something that we need to share with everybody. And we should be open about it, what we want. We should be open about our red lines, what we want to achieve. I think this entire arena of RE, reconstruction, or the arena of de-radicalization, etc., must be put out prominently in the entire domain. In fact, I would say that we shouldn't look for a perfect normal in the environment, in the security situation, another arena. I think we should just get on with the real development and engagement as at the moment. Armed forces have created this environment many a times, but most important is, can we as a nation take advantage of this? Now coming straight to the focus, that is what strategy should we follow? I personally feel that red lines have been created by the nation. They've been told at the right forum, and now we need to have capability, capacity, and the skill and the decision for action on those. First, from the security point of view, POK and Gilgit-Baltistan has to be reintegrated. No doubt in this. We can't have that China-Pakistan wants to create China-Pakistan economic corridor through the area that belongs to us. How can we tolerate as an Indian? It's a sovereignty issue. It's an issue on which there is no compromise. I'm cautious that I'll take 20 minutes. Second is that we got to keep the separatists, Pakistani sympathizers, spoilers, anti-India proxies and lobbies away, isolated, reduce them, reduce the space, restrict them. I would say after abrogation of Article 370, some amount of internet blockade and detention we had to go through. I think that's a hard decision which had to be taken to keep Pakistan away from interfering with our processes. Then next is that NIA must continue on its check on the terror funding. The illegal financial injection into the Kashmir has been going for too long. Pakistan is the center of gravity of terrorism as far as Kashmir is concerned. So therefore, we need to have a punitive and precise, the heavy retaliation whenever they get into the terrorist act. I personally feel the days of being reactive has gone. We need to be preemptive and proactive and take hard action. I think Balakot is one example. I think if next time we need to be, we should go for Balakot plus. That's the way I look at it. Next is socially, I think women is one area which is a very powerful factor in Kashmir society. I think that is one area where we got to focus a lot. I really don't know how to go about it, but in the domain of social engineering, this is a very important factor. I got immense faith in women and mothers of Kashmir, honestly. Youth is one area, I think they are the one who are at very critical cross junction at this moment. Employment, education, business, I think that is what is needed by them. They need to be busy. I had led a military delegation to China where I went to Urumqi. In the evening at about 5:36, there was almost about 30,000 people who were in the yard. So I asked, why have you collected these people? They said, we want to keep them busy. So keeping our youth busy is a very important factor for us. I think development, that is what we got to do. And it can only be done once the investment is there. One is very happy with the initiatives that we've taken on the district development council elections. I think we have involved the base of the society, of the awam. I think if I have to sum up, I would say focus on governance, administration, delivery, integration. That is what is required. And it is important for us with the center-led initiative, we got to generate employment, industry, and business. And in the end, I just want to say one point, that when the subject is patriotism, nationalism, and of loyalty, then there is no half aspects of it. There can't be with conditions. There can't be doubts in it. Either you're loyal or you're not loyal. I think that's the way we've been taught in the armed forces. I think some of the things which really irritates when in the current side, I won't say irritate, but maybe having a different perception, but to going for a talk with the Pakistan till the time Pakistan doesn't reverse the whole cycle of terrorism in a irreversible and verifiable way, there is no, we shouldn't get into talk with them. And asking China for help or having doubts on the national flag, saying that we should participate in China-Pakistan economic corridor or sympathize with the terrorism are some of the emotions I think we need to, I won't say a hard word like crush, but we must ensure that they are controlled, managed. And I would say in the end, the last sentence is, it's okay to blame Pakistan and ISI, but we can blame nobody else for governance and administration. We got to blame ourselves. And therefore, our priority has got to be governance and administration for the Awam in Kashmir. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Jai Hind. Thank you very much, General Singh, for very energized words and very clear. This is what we expect from our military leaders, this clarity that national integrity is most sacrosanct, and whatever views he said, he has fought in the valley. But at the same time, we entirely agree that we cannot keep on blaming others. Governance is something which is within us. We need stronger capacity. With these words, I invite Tamina Rizviji. She represents Voice of Kashmir. She is a young person. She represents youth. She is a young woman. And I would say not only Kashmir, she represents India in multiple ways. As far as the assimilation or integration of emotional integration of people of Kashmir with India is concerned, there's absolutely no confusion for us at this foundation. And we all believe that there are issues, there are certain things which our people are capable of handling it. But this kind of enlightened perspective helps us negotiate further, rather navigate further from a position of strength. Tamina ji, please welcome, please share your thoughts in this subject.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. And it's an honor to share the platform with the fellow panelists here. While we have discussed at length the historical backdrop of the Kashmir disturbance, and security experts have given the brief, all of the panelists have covered the topic on security front very nicely. I'll just briefly explain the scenario of terrorism and insurgency in Kashmir, and briefly explain how I look at the problem. And I think that's why I'm here, to provide the fresh perspective of that. And after that, I'll be discussing the need for an effective strategy. Terrorist ideology usually is very few people, but manages to terrify people at large. And the sole motive is to shape political structure. That's what we have seen in India and out of the India everywhere. They try to change the political balance of power. In Kashmir, they have made people believe that they can protect citizens from political imbalance and injustice. That is the ideology they have been manifesting, that wherever we see political imbalance and injustice in Kashmir, we're there to provide justice to the citizens. The mind spaces of Kashmiri people are occupied by different ideologies, and I would particularly say there is not one side to it. Usually we have people who are driven by Pakistani ideology, we have people who are driven by Indian ideology, and we have people who are driven by the Azadi ideology, which doesn't belong to any of the sides. Political scenarios are usually not easy to change, but violent extremism has been able to do it to some extent, because right now when we see whole of the country's attention is diverted to one state, that is Kashmir, and usually that makes India very vulnerable, because if they have been successfully able to drag their attention to Kashmir, they can easily plan any other damage within the country. When we look at Kashmir, usually it's a multi-dimensional issue. We can't merely believe that it suffers from armed conflict or insurgency. There are some other issues too. And right now, post-pandemic challenges of terrorism will be entirely different. I was recently reading the data 1 week before, which says that recruitment of terrorists in 2020 has increased. Though the incidents are less, they haven't planned any incidents as of now, but the recruitment has increased. Also, they have started recruiting youth online. Now, when the COVID situation was there and the scenario was such that people were not able to train them face to face, they have managed to capture the cyberspace. There might be bioterrorism tomorrow that would pose more serious threats and would demand for drastic reaction from the government. So I believe that we should be ready for different type of scenarios and different types of challenges. In the current scenario, militancy is not of weapons but of ideology. Because when they are training the youth online, there's not every time we can't say that there's availability of weapons, but the infiltration of ideology to an extent where youth is totally driven towards the ideology they believe that is the right path according to them. They believe that it's the path of truth. So we have to start looking at this problem from different dimensions. Now, when we talk about the need for effective strategy, there are a lot of things that can be done. Like it has been previously mentioned that how women empowerment can play one role into it, and also that uh, we have been seeing there are very less number of women who are into mainstream leadership, who are into such roles which give decision making power to them, which gives them the authoritative role in the society. So that needs to be tackled. So all of the strategies we'll be discussing or thinking from the policy perspective. The basic rule to creating strategy is that we need to be considerate and compassionate towards the people of Kashmir and take them into confidence. That's how we'll be able to manifest the strategies on the ground positively. We can only say we're successful in our strategy when we won't need much army in Kashmir. I can't completely say that we withdraw all of the troops because I do understand the sensitivities of security perspective also. But the day when there will be less army will be a day when we can effectively say that we have achieved success to some extent. There should be a midway to tackle the ideology at the very beginning instead of killing and losing a life and then compensating for that life in monetary form. Media also, I would say, plays a very large role in creating hysteria because terrorism can't succeed much without publicity. Because for them, I believe, reports on terrorism gets more TRP than reports on sexual abuse or climate change. Talking about the resolutions, we need to identify the point of similarity between people. And there are, for sure, a lot of similarities between the culture, between the people of Kashmir and other states of India. So we need to find the similarities. That's how we'll be able to negotiate better for a more collaborative resolution process. Usually, new policies, when they come around, if people are not considered and they're not asked before, that slightly poses a threat. So, psychologically, I'm speaking. Posing a threat should be the last option when all other options of resolution are exhausted. So again, the point remains that you have to consider them and be compassionate towards them because they have they have been betrayed. I believe Kashmiri people have been betrayed over time, not only by one side, from all other sides, whether it's politics, whether it's something else, they have been betrayed. And by that betrayal, I believe they're hurt. The people they're hurt. So right now they don't need hard and fast rules for that. What they need is compassion. And that's how we can build a confidence within them. Besides that, we should definitely hire, I believe, I am particularly of this belief that we should hire mediators, dialogue facilitators, peace builders, and development practitioners who are experts in the field. Because usually, see, what we do as policymakers, we can be good at policy making, researching, but then we might not be very tactful of going on the field and facilitate dialogues and negotiate with the people, because that's not what we are meant for. So the expertise who are particularly meant for all this, we should have a team definitely. Considering educational institutions will be also very important, because we should include a curriculum which involves a multicultural approach. Usually, last time when I was into some of my research projects, I got to know that the education curriculum does have some books which only talks about one religion, which only talks about the strong statehood and strong identity. It is though important. I don't consider it not important that we shouldn't tell our kids that what is our religion, our Kashmiriyat. But I do also recognize that there is a dire need that we should be teaching them other aspects of culture also. Like India as a country is very diverse, so we're supposed to teach them other multicultural things. There are different stages and fields for strategies, and there's a need to identify those stages. I believe that we can't just make a strategy and go with predefined notions, go to Kashmir and the strategy over them without talking to them and without realizing what they actually need. So we need to identify the stages, and there might be different strategies for different stages. So we need to identify those, and after that go with the strategy that will be very helpful on ground. Kashmiri society also has some certain needs like any other society in India. Like youth obviously does need internet, the modern education, the extracurriculars. So we need to understand those certain changes, those certain needs should be usually. We should actually treat a Kashmiri youth as we treat any other person in India. Otherwise, usually what we see in the society that people look at me in a different manner they should be looking at me, I believe. So that is I will be slightly alienated inside that why do they look at me like this? And why do they look at me always like this, that I would be fundamental in my approach, or I'll be radicalized? Usually every youth in Kashmir is not radicalized. I do understand that there is a certain sect of that, but there are people, we have records, we have a lot of bureaucrats from Kashmir. Every year, UPSC has got a good number of people from Kashmir. We have army recruitment from Kashmir. We have people in center from Kashmir. We have senior academicians and everyone from Kashmir. But there's a scenario where people look at us in a way that they might be fundamental or they might be radicalized. I have also personally faced that when I am like, I would say I'm least a person who will be of a radicalized mindset. But yeah, people do sometimes look at me like that. And then I have to go out, clear myself that no, it doesn't work that way. We don't look at us through one dimension. So yeah, that needs to be changed, which if we break it down, it's a very simpler process of awareness generation where we could make people understand that usually that is not the scenario what media has created, what international media has created, what other things have created. That is not the way you look at us. So that is a simpler process of awareness generation. Changes, I believe, all of this, what I have discussed, can't be made in one day, obviously, but we can have like one step at a time. Government should try making space for normal life, because what happens is when there is a space for conflict, when there's a space for disturbances, what has been discussed, yeah, Pakistan does try to make disturbances fill with their own ideologies. what happens is when we had a political vacuum in 2020, so they tried more recruitments because that's what they try to shift the political power towards themselves. They try to fill the vacuum by their ideology. So we don't have to let them do that. When we create normal spaces, healthy spaces with healthy political scenario, I don't think that any other country or any other ideology will be able to take space into that. And that's what I believe in: youth development, peace building, conflict resolution, women empowerment. These are some of the points we need to consider. And that's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tahmina ji, for bringing this rich perspective and very thoughtful. We all agree that life, liberty, and dignity of people, and especially, I would say, all citizens throughout the country is very critical. And our people in Jammu and Kashmir, they are vulnerable in multiple ways to malicious kind of propaganda or subversive kind of agenda of Pakistani state that is understandable. And since this conflict, I wouldn't say conflict, since these disturbances have prolonged for so long, one can understand the pain people would have undergone, and it is not going to be easy to rather address their, I would say, sentiments and emotions, and they cannot be quick solutions. It was very impressive. You said that it cannot happen in one day, but we have to go. And there's certainly realization, as you pointed it out, that a large number of young people have been joining defense forces. They have been joining mainstream civil service, and wherever they are, they have been working like any other citizen from any other part of the country. And that integration, that emotional, psychological, and social integration has to continue. And rather, we need to be very sympathetic and empathetic as far as people are concerned. And certainly, they should not be treated separately. I'm very confident that there are a lot of young people like you in Kashmir, and they are fully aware that Pakistan has nothing to offer us except, a very clandestine syndicate which has been ruling that country for its own interest. When they fail to protect, as Dulat Saab also pointed out, their own people, what can they offer us and what can they offer our citizens? So with these words, we have a very distinguished military general and a military leader, and now an academic, General Atta Hasnain. He has served again in Kashmir Valley. He has been speaking at various platforms, and he has sent his speech. So before I come out with my concluding remarks and start a Q&A session, I would like that we run that speech. General Atta Hasnain, he needs no introduction, Soham has told it, and we would straight away like to go to his speech.
Good evening and Jai Hind. Thank you so much, Tillotoma Foundation, for having invited me for this excellent webinar. I'm acutely conscious of the very high quality of people that you have on this panel to discuss the situation in Jammu and Kashmir and the way forward, the strategy involved with that. I'm afraid I'm so sorry about it. In fact, I wish to apologize that I could not be there in person to speak, and this has to be a recorded version which is coming forth to you, the viewers, and to my fellow panelists. I have been told that the prime focus here is on the termination, the conflict termination of what started in 1989, the initiation of conflict in 1989. We are speaking about termination. We are speaking about resolution in the year 2021. So that is what I'm going to focus on, and more from a military angle, some of it from my experience angle. Let me start with the fact that there is an external factor here and there's an internal factor here. My emphasis will be on the internal factor, but I will speak a little on the external factor right at the beginning. This issue for the last 30 years is being played out in the form of a proxy war. It's a sponsored proxy conflict. And in that sponsored proxy conflict, it is not conventional in any way. The only conventional angle is what is happening on the line of control. It is essentially a hybrid conflict, which means that there are different domains from the conflict spectrum which are at play here, which includes sub-conventional operations. It involves lots and lots of psychological and information warfare operations. It involves a lot of ideological issues. It is also involved with narcotics and narco-terrorism. There are issues with networks. I mean, so you can pick and choose from a very large spectrum of activities which have continued here for the better part of the last 30, 31 years. Most of this sponsored by Pakistan from the other side. The issue is that after the 5th of August, 2005, when the decisions were taken for the abrogation of Article 370, I consider that that decision has been taken, and now it is a done case. Even reflecting on how to undo this whole thing is today something which is not possible. Which is why I get surprised when many of the political parties in the valley are speaking about that aspect, rollback of Article 370, the return of constitution, the Jammu and Kashmir constitution. I think this is all now an open and shut case. Let's talk about Pakistan. Pakistan is shell-shocked by what happened on the 5th of August, ran out of a lot of options. Some of the hard measures taken here, some of the other measures taken to counter the networks, counter the communication, etc., diluted Pakistan's hold on the whole situation. And for the better part of the last 1.5 years, Pakistan has been floundering. Diplomatically, they tried to take India to the cleaners, but could not succeed very much. Even in the Islamic world, not too much of a dent. Yes, the OIC did pass a resolution, but it was a passing resolution in the foreign ministers summit, but nothing of great substance as such. By and large, you found the major countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, etc., have stood by India. Having said that, there's a lot of demand certainly within the country. I don't know whether it's fair or unfair on the armed forces, especially that people think that overnight the whole of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, will return to the Indian fold, to our fold. The claims that we made since, particularly, I mean, it's hardly a claim. It's always been there that the whole of Jammu and Kashmir belongs to India. But the claims that we substantiated a little more in 1994 when we passed the resolution in Parliament, all parties came together to do that. And now the demand is, when will POK, when will Gilgit-Baltistan come back to India? A part of that because of some of the rhetoric involved with that. Nothing wrong with that rhetoric, because it does convey messages to Pakistan that and to the world in general that India is hell-bent to ensure that this issue is resolved once and for all. It has to be resolved with the return of the entire territories to back to India. Now, this is what has complicated the issue a little further. Gilgit-Baltistan is a large tract of territory, 1.5 million population. POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir, are joining that. Now, to think of militarily returning that means the involvement of a third party, that is China, which has got deep strategic interests inside Gilgit-Baltistan today. And particularly in the year 2020, with the pandemic environment also, China decided that perhaps India had gone very far in its overall gaining of strategic confidence. And they could be, if left undone, if left to itself, India may take some very, very bold initiatives in the future. And that's one of the reasons why a bit of a coercive strategy has been employed in Ladakh to try and send warnings to India. This seems to be a collusive thing between Pakistan and China. So therefore, the whole Jammu and Kashmir issue is a little more complicated than what has been there and what we have been perceiving it to be all this time. It plays to China's advantage completely if the hinterland of Jammu and Kashmir is in upheaval, in some form of turbulence at any time. You'll find that the Indian security attention has to be then focused in that area as much as it's got to be focused to the northern borders or towards Gilgit-Baltistan. So we are not, the other issue which is important is that Pakistan by itself, its capability to control and run things in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir, have by and large diluted. much of the networks are down today. We'll speak a little more about that. Its ability to control the politics of Kashmir, its ability to inspire people in Kashmir, its ability to play the old narrative internationally. All this has taken a bit of a beating. But it is not down and out. It still continues to play the same old game. With the situation in Pakistan, the kind of political turbulence internally in Pakistan, with the kind of financial turbulence within Pakistan, one should say, the deep state is always has the means to divert attention or try and look at Jammu and Kashmir as the issue through which it can take away all the attention from all the negatives which are happening inside Pakistan. In the year 2020, they have not been able to do much. They have not been able to sponsor too much of insurrection or turbulence inside, or the mobs on the streets and things like that. They have not been able to bring in too much of separatist rhetoric either. In fact, almost nil completely. They have not been able to infiltrate too many terrorists. There is hardly a terrorist in leadership left inside the valley. The Pakistani terrorist presence is low. Foreign terrorist presence is low. The number of young terrorists who could be, or the young people in South Kashmir in particular, who could be recruited to come into the ranks of the Hizbul Mujahideen or the Lashkar-e-Taiba these days, has reduced to a very, very great extent this particular year. So besides that, internally the situation is such that the security forces have been able to eliminate about over 200 terrorists. But that, to my mind, is not a relevant issue. You see, in the dying moments of an insurgency or a terrorist movement, these things will happen. You will kill a large number of terrorists, depends on how much of the presence of terrorists at that time. But there will be a few who will always remain. So you find that today you may have killed 200 terrorists, but 150, 200 are still there. And therefore, it's not possible for you to eliminate everything. What is more important is prevent more coming in. So the counter-infiltration grid is in a strong position at the moment. We have controlled infiltration to a very great extent. Internally, the nature of terrorist operations has changed. There are, well, no terrorist ambushes, for example. The intelligence has been very good and very forthcoming. And the terrorists have been on the run. They have not been seeking encounters. So by that, you can really make out that there isn't too much in the movement at the moment. There isn't too much muscle in the movement. And primarily, you can attribute that to the fact that the financial networks are absolutely down. There's not too much money coming in or being able to spread out easily, and intelligence being very good at the same time. There's not too much of weaponry. You may recall the incident in Nagrata, where recently 4 terrorists were killed, and 4 terrorists were carrying 10 AK-47, which is surprising, which is actually surprising, because normally you have 4 terrorists with 3 or 2 AK-47s and 2 pistols or something like that, but 10, obviously there is a dearth of weapons inside the valley, and an attempt was being made to induct weapons through the Jammu sector, and that is the sector through which more and more infiltration is also likely to take place in the future. So having said that, on the other spheres inside the valley, we should look at the political domain, we should look at the economic and social domain, the governance domain, the communication domain, that is the perception domain. How is the perception playing out at the moment? So let me just look at these very, very briefly. Firstly, I think the security forces have also been able to address what is called the overground worker networks quite effectively. This is something, well, virtually new in the sense, last 3 years. Before that, lots of complaints used to take place from the security forces, but not much was ever done about this. Money used to come in, money used to exchange hands. There were awkward politics going on all over the place, which has come to an end for the moment at least. And therefore, money has definitely taken a beating.
The media, large number of media houses, large number of English newspapers, Urdu newspapers are published. Most of the media is not showing the type of anti-national bent of mind that it had earlier, comparatively much more low-key. So, and the overground worker networks, otherwise, the other networks, the ideological networks, the legal networks, and things like that, they seem to be generally. Now, unless these networks are under control, you will find that terrorism will always have a way of coming back. The sponsors can always pump in some amount of money, pump in some kind of a inspiration, pump in a few leaders from time to time, and you will find there'll be spurts of activity which will come up. But that is what is important. We must ensure that the spurt of activity doesn't take place in the next few years. This should be completely low-key. Violence should be low-key. Mob turbulence should not be there at all. Networks should be down completely. But we have found, for example, with the networks being controlled, you suddenly found drugs. Drugs have suddenly, there's an upsurge of drugs suddenly. You find even in Jammu, in the last 2 days, we have seen incidents of networks being unearthed there. So drugs is the new financial, it's the new financial kind of thing which is coming up. Money is sort of in currency is actually going in the form of drugs in that area, much like it happened in Punjab some years ago. So these things under control is very good. What happens with the political activity? We're glad to see that with the district development council elections, political activity has come to the fore. Some grassroots activity. So in the interim, before you have the assembly elections, maybe the assembly elections will take place only after the delimitation has taken place, may take up to 2 years. At least you've had some semblance of democratic activity, and that will probably cool tempers, calm down people. Hopefully, the newly collected councillors will all start playing their role. They will have greater say in the planning process in their own districts, etc. These are very, very important things which make a difference in a internal conflict ridden area such as Kashmir, which has been there for the last over 30 years. So I'm hopeful of that. The only thing which is one is not comfortable with is that the politics seems to be very, very divided in the same manner that it was before. Exactly the same results have come out in the DDC elections as they always came out, with Jammu going one way, the valley going one way, the areas of the Chenab and the Pir Panjal going another way, with political, some kind of a gamemanship going on in these areas to control them. That's the same old narrative. This narrative has to change. And if this narrative has to change, I think the effort has to be, well, it has to be externally driven to some extent, but it has to be internally managed. And to that extent, the people of Jammu, the people of Kashmir have to get together. I think the leaderships owe it to their people that enough is enough. You can't look in two different directions. I think the very, very good decision taken by the government of India that they did not trifurcate Jammu and Kashmir in their wisdom, whatever they wanted to do at that time, they bifurcated it and kept Jammu and Kashmir together. Obviously, someone understood the whole idea that Jammu and Kashmir have deep linkages with each other. There are great stakes between each other. There are business stakes. There are social stakes between them. These stakes need to be played upon. And these sentiments need to be played upon. If you wish to have the return of the Kashmiri Pandits in a trickle or in whatever manner back to the valley, you can't have a cleavage between Jammu and Kashmir. You have to create the conditions for that. Now that's something which is a major challenge, and this is one of the challenges for the political class, the political community in Jammu and Kashmir. The other aspect is a particular question again related to security. If I may come back to that, a lot of people are saying that the army should be pulled out, go back to the line of control. The more army resources are required in Ladakh, and the army has got greater conventional threats all over. I would strongly urge people not to be in a hurry to do these things. We have stabilized Jammu and Kashmir with a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And I want to remind people about the age-old adage that the absence of violence is not normalcy. Please don't count it as normalcy. Normalcy is many other activities in the social, political, economic governance domains. Don't classify normalcy by just looking at the security domain or the military domain. And it's strange for a military person to say that. But this type of a conflict is all about it. It's all about this only. So I would say, hold your horses. Hold your horses. There can be areas which can be diluted. You can reduce presence to some extent, but be very careful. Let there be an element of permanence come about as far as the situation is concerned. And then when you're confident that these networks have been neutralized and there's no chance of a bounce back, then perhaps take your decisions. I'm sure they will be absolutely correct decisions. The last thing which I would definitely like to address, and that is the aspect of the people. See, this kind of a situation, for the last so many years, every single speaker who's come on our webinar will have spoken and said, the center of gravity of such a conflict are the people. I say, I go a little beyond. I say, okay, the people are the center of gravity. There's no doubt. You may change things artificially here and there, everywhere, but until the people come to support you to do that, you are not going to ultimately succeed. So you have to ensure that the people come to your side. They don't remain alienated. For us, I think the best bet is to assume that a large segment of people are alienated. And even if that may not be true, let us err on the plus side and say, yes, they are alienated. Let's take the measures to de-alienate them. Let's take the measures to convey and communicate the clear message, two clear messages. Number one, that they are part of this country. They are part of India. They are as much Indian as you or me. The second thing, that any aspiration that they may enjoy or have in their minds that Kashmir can become a part of Pakistan should be kept out of their minds. That Kashmir or Jammu and Kashmir can become an independent entity should be cast out of their minds. This is what we have to work on. The international security environment is such. The regional security environment is such. The ideological environment is such that an independent status of Jammu and Kashmir and or the possibility of Jammu and Kashmir being a part of Pakistan is something which just cannot arise. It's a part of India. It shall remain a part of India. And therefore, if the best thing would be for the people to be a willing part of India, to be partners in the growth of India. That is what is important. How do you do this? We have spoken in lots of times about this. And everyone knows what to do. Everyone knows what to do. It's not just a question of building a few schools. It's not a question of just a few medical camps. The Operation Sadbhavna, which the Indian Army launched in 1997, is a superb exercise, let me say. It has achieved a lot. It's in the tactical domain of winning hearts and minds or military civic action, etc. But this issue is far beyond that. I think what needs to be done is that the state has to now take this issue into its hand, takes the ownership of this whole campaign into its own hands. It has to convey the message. And there has to be an all of government approach. I am so thrilled when I see the COVID vaccine rollout taking place in India. It's going to be one of the biggest logistic exercises ever undertaken in the world. If India can put its act together so marvelously, professionally, of course, the proof of the pudding will ultimately be when it's eaten, but so far what it seems to be, it is an amazing thing which is coming together. 18 ministries putting their resources together. It's really a classic all-of-government approach, which is being played out in the field of the COVID vaccine rollout. I say, you have a problem here existing for the last 30 years. it needs to be addressed in exactly the same way, an all of government approach. 20 ministries, 25 ministries have to come together. This is not the role. This is not for the army to do. This is not for the police to do. This is not for the intelligence agencies to do. This is for the people of India to do. And that is why I say I think a great amount of energy into governance, a great amount of outreach by the political community, facilitated by the army and the security forces. Wherever the political community wants to go in Kashmir, to engage with the people, to sit with the people, to eat wazwan with the people, this should be a continuous process which should go on, and the army should facilitate it as much as possible it can. I think this is the strategy which needs to be played out into the future. Political cooling down, strong all of government approach, and outreach into the field to the people, an effective control over the networks, an effective control over counter infiltration, making sure that there are no mistakes made in the field of counter-terror operations, something like what's happened at Amshipura recently. These things create bad blood, they create negativity. So this is exactly how. And then internationally, the narratives that India has been able to achieve in the last few years, those narratives must be played out effectively. We cannot allow any other narrative to be in the minds of the international community, international institutions. It should be the Indian narrative which should be played out there. That's all I have to say. I'm sure. And I'm sure that we are on the right path at the moment. A little more energy, a little more maybe strategizing, and control over the issues which I've spoken about. I'm sure in a few years' time, things should be definitely much more positive. I'm looking at 2021 as a year which will probably make a difference. But my way of looking at things is always long term. We should be planning for 2025, and we should look at what the end state of 2030 should be and work backwards to see how we can achieve it. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you. It was a delight to listen to General Hasnain. He is someone who has served in the valley, and now as a very distinguished academic, someone who has engaged the issue of Kashmir, he has been very forthright. All the speakers have mentioned about the issue of governance and the issue of emotional integration of people of Kashmir with rest of the country. We are very clear that this is the way forward, but the issue is how to go about. It's very easy to say that we need these A, B, C, and D, all these issues, but let me tell you, it's not that easy to restructure your governance capacity straight away. On this issue, I would also say that Kashmir is not a standalone problem. It could be some way rather a reflection of our governance and security capacity. Our democracy is brilliant. In most adverse circumstances, we have sustained this model of governance or this model of political system. But despite that, there are issues, particularly on governance and security, where we may have to cover a long way. As far as Kashmir is concerned, there are multiple prisms through which we can see various speakers. They brought out their own perspectives. And I think each one of them had something extraordinary to contribute. Geopolitics, national security, human rights, all these are interlinked. There is no conflict at all. I would say we have mentioned also about covert proxy war by Pakistan. I would say 2 or 3 things. That this is most difficult kind of war to handle, covert and proxy war. And in this covert and proxy war, Pakistan has been constantly trying to bring in the factor of emotional identity. And all over the world, I am not saying it, most of the think tanks, when they have carried out this research, they say wherever issue of identity comes in, people become very emotive. It becomes very difficult for people to think rationally. We must give credit to people of Kashmir that despite curtailment of liberties, despite everything, most of them, they don't look at Pakistan seriously. Maybe sometimes to annoy, sometimes to irritate, they can say things, but that option is very clear. None of them, they want to look at it. Indian state has to appear strong. As General also pointed it out, that nobody should nurture this aspiration that that this possibility exists, they all in fact look at India as an opportunity, and they look at their future with India. But issue is how to strengthen this thing, and how to rather destroy capacity of Pakistan to sustain and wage this covert war. General mentioned about drugs. Let me tell you, I have been a student and researcher of irregular warfare, and nowhere in the world, this insurgency or terrorism can survive without organized crime. And Pakistan, I would say, we should not look at Pakistani state as a normal state. Pakistani state is a very unique kind of state. Military is there, but I would say there's a very small syndicate, and that small syndicate has been ruling Pakistan. They have been hoodwinking people of Pakistan by citing various issues and so-called alienation of Muslims or ill treatment of Muslims in India. And moment our cohesion becomes very strong, they go on defense. Their position weakens internally. Rather, when we say that we have to wrest initiative, we have to say that humanization of Pakistan is very critical for peace and stability in this region. If there is genuine democracy in Pakistan, I'm very confident that a lot more people will speak up against their own systems, and already people have been speaking up against their systems, their establishments. And I share at this point of time General Gurmit's view, former Deputy Chief's view, that unless and until Pakistan gives up what it is doing, like patronizing organized crime, patronizing terror and insurgency, we should keep away from them. But when we talk about this proxy war, there are multiple dimensions. But one thing is very clear: nowhere in the world, through military means, this kind of thing can be resolved. And we are very clear of it. And we must say, credit also goes to Indian Defense Forces, that despite this sustained, I would say, disturbances for 30 years or plus, of course, civilian population has faced a lot of brunt. There have been a lot of collateral and avoidable damages, and these have built their own momentum, because moment there is curtailment of liberties, there are excesses, and nowhere in the world security forces are so well trained to do it. But our security forces have come a long way, and both security forces and people of Kashmir, they need to be complemented for maintaining it. But for the general people, we must also share about this dynamics of organized crime and Pakistani state's involvement. General mentioned about drugs. We have also, I am not saying it, some of the best think tanks, some of the best research paper, including Directorate of National Intelligence of America, including their armed forces, all these doctrines say that how organized crime, how drug trade, how counterfeiting, Pakistan has built an expertise. 84% of the global drug is produced in Afghanistan, and through their proxy Taliban, Pakistani state has been having some kind of monopoly. Every other day, every few days, sometimes it comes out in media, sometimes it doesn't come out in media, Pakistani nationals are caught trafficking drug in international waters. And for them, as Shri Dulat also pointed out, Pakistanis have been thinking Kashmir as an issue. They have been trying to milk it. As far as well-being of people of Kashmir is concerned, it is certainly not on their priority. If they cannot think of well-being of their own people, can they think of well-being of people of Kashmir? In 2019, I had written a piece, Kashmir was elusive piece. It was written before Article 370 was annulled. And I said how much development has taken place in that area, how much it has transformed, and how our security forces have also become aware. What happens in a situation of distrust, whether it is security forces or common people, in situation of distrust, there are problems. And moment this distrust factor starts, moment people are disturbed and emotions are running high, we can't expect people to act in a normal way. So naturally, it's very easy to start this kind of war, but very difficult to conclude. But in this war, there are no winners. And once again, we are very glad that we have a lot of people from Kashmir on this, in the members of the audience also. We are indeed grateful to them. We have to find a solution, and the final solution, whatever it is, there is already a solution. I would say the final solution is when Kashmiris start contributing as much to collective and composite strength of India and being a beneficiary of this. And wherever required, I would say, it's not that, earlier also I said, it's not a standalone problem. India has to bolster its governance and security capacity both. And security capacity, when we talk about security of people, is at the core. We need a very efficient criminal justice system. We need defense of human rights in each and every part of the country. And if the quality of our democracy enhances, naturally the trust in Kashmiris, their pride of being an Indian will enhance. 10 years back, Large number of Pakistanis after 9/11 and after Pakistan's hand had surfaced throughout in terror networks, whether it was in Saudi Arabia or in Europe. Large number of Pakistanis or people of Pakistani origins, they had started describing themselves as Indian. So I would say that whole world acknowledges that a cohesive, vibrant, secular, democratic India is very critical for peace and stability in this region. We have to say, how can we strengthen this idea of India? And this cannot be done by force at all. And this cannot be done by some changes, cosmetic changes in Kashmir alone. Maybe our governance capacity throughout the country has to improve. Maybe our capacity to handle this kind of covert war throughout the country has to improve. And we have to have, I would say, worldwide capacity to decimate some of these organized crime networks Pakistan has been running. I suppose last year we came across an instance that where one policeman was involved transporting some terrorists. I would say this could be symptom of a larger problem, because when this kind of insurgency or this kind of disturbance persists, vested interests come up. In various ways they come up, and they become mercenaries, they become beneficiaries of this thing, and these people are not interested in general plight of people anywhere. So I would say that overall governance capacity has to improve, overall transparency of agencies and institutions have to improve, and sooner we do it, it is better for us, because no other country anywhere in the world faces such kind of hostile neighbors. We have two nuclear-armed hostile neighbors. We are having issues with them. And within these two countries, of course, they are at different levels of economic development, but there's a very small caucus, very small number of people who are controlling powers, levels of power. And these people believe that they have stronger capacity to wage this kind of proxy war or mobilize their resources for conflict. And under these circumstances, a democratic India becomes critical for everyone. With these words, we will invite questions. That there are inimical forces inside the country via Chinese goods and Pakistani goods, by Dr. Abdul Bashir. General, would you like to respond? There are Pakistanis inside the country via Chinese goods and Pakistani goods. And there is one question by Mohit Zaman to General Singh. Question for Lieutenant General Gurmit Singh. Do you think India still requires a hard presence of Indian Army in Kashmir for peace?
Thank you so much for this question. I think this is a very pertinent question. Firstly, on the aspect of anti-India forces, and specifically like what you said of China and Pakistan lobbies and proxies. In fact, I would compliment you for this question, and that too, this question comes from Kashmir. It gives me a lot of confidence that you are very observant and alert on what is actually happening. See, China has been, they follow the strategy of 3 Ws, 3 warfare. That is a psychological war, media war, and the legal war. They've been spending huge amount on propaganda and psychological warfare. Amount of investment which they have done in the foreign nations or in the target companies, in the media, in the intellectuals, in the academicians, and so many, I would say, the centers of excellence. In fact, this is the biggest challenge that we have as India. In fact, you would see, in fact, it's just yesterday only when the former diplomat from the Pakistan said, he admitted on the casualties that they've had in the Balakot airstrike. But you would remember when this thing happened, how the Pakistan proxies, anti-India forces were trying to raise questions on whether this thing happened or not happened. In fact, they were even questioning after the Pulwama terrorist attack that who has got it done. And finally, we heard in the parliament of the Pakistan, they said that they are the one who are behind this terrorist action. So I would say that anti-India forces, China and proxies, China and Pakistan proxy, they've been working overtime, overdrive on this aspect. So therefore, I think it is important that the cognitive domain has got to be correctly balanced. I think this is the place where the narrative comes I was so glad that Madam Rizvi, she brought it so beautifully. She says this game of narrative is very simple. You got to tell what it is. But unfortunately, as a nation, we not been telling a narrative. We not been telling what the real aspect is. But one thing is fine. Like in life, one has learned one thing, that look, the truth can never be kept under the carpet. The truth will come out. And unfortunately, Pakistan entire strategy, entire policy is based on lies, proxy, propaganda. They've taken a total different line of deniability, and they're paying for it. I must share with you something very interesting. I was in Washington. I was doing course in National Defense University in Washington, and we had two Pakistanis. I was also colonel at that time. They were later corps commanders. In fact, at that time, I told them that, look, you are trying to have a lot of fun with mujahideens and the terrorists, and you are boasting that your country is anchoring what is happening in Afghanistan for the US. And I said, they are poisonous insects. They will spoil your society too. They're going to harm you. And no nation, no organization, no institution can base its long-term perspective on lies, proxies, and untruth. I think that is something that, from long-term perspective, we see the thing. And sorry, I couldn't get the second part of the question, which was there, which was directed. Can you please repeat it?
He said India requires a hard presence of army in Kashmir for peace.
That's a beautiful question indeed. I must compliment you for this. Actually, armed forces are meant for external threat. Let there be no doubt about this. As an army man, for me, the priority is the conventional threat. For me, the primary threat of India from the security point of view is China. I think let's have our facts absolutely clear about this thing. And it is actually the environment where one has got to come and support the police forces for the counterterrorism. But it's a temporary phase. Once the conditions in the valley become okay, army will go back to its conventional and the primary task. To be very honest, as an army man, the pleasure that we take in the primary task is immense. I must tell you that I commanded the corps, commanded a brigade, the Corps Reserve Brigade in the valley, which is basically the offensive troops and meant for these tasks, conventional tasks, whenever the conflict will be. But I think it is also very important that our nation has been facing the challenges of insurgency and terrorism. In fact, I would say that I have personally, as an individual, as a practitioner, I have participated in 8 counter-terrorism tenures, uh, be it Northeast or Sri Lanka or other part of the nation, and 5 tenures in Kashmir. This was a compulsion for us. And I also must tell you one thing, that whenever army gets into the counter-terrorism, we have always been propagating that we must assist the security forces, the police forces, and the other elements which are controlling the counter-terrorism. If you look at the entire aspect of Kashmir at the moment, then most important aspect is the counter-infiltration grid, which is totally being done by the army. And counter-terrorism, we do it to the security forces. But I personally feel we will have to review it after some time. But at this moment, it's not the correct moment to reduce the signatures of the army in the counter-terrorism or the counter-infiltration grid at the moment. I also must share with you that this year, I would say the previous year in the beginning, we had thickened up the counter-infiltration grid. And that was the reason that despite so many attempts by Pakistan, by the ceasefire violation and infiltration, it failed because we are
we have a lot of questions for Professor Mattoo.
Thank you.
So, a lot of questions, sir. Thank you for your response. Professor Mattoo, there are a large number of questions for you. Rather, one question is asking that how do you react to Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan's comment that once lockdown measures are taken down, there would be a bloodbath? Do you think India risks itself from harm associated with Kashmir because of Article 370, abrogation of Article 370?
Actually, Mr. Oja, what you have in the audience are people who have studied Kashmir and have visited Kashmir, and it would be good to have a much more engaged discussion. For instance, one of the questions is from Mridu Rai,
Yes.
Professor Mridu Rai. It is that 35A and 370. You know, fundamentally, I think the strategy of the Indian state vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir, post 53 at least, if not before, has been an integration of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this integration was through either a combination of force, accommodation, negotiation. I mean, force could be the dismissal of Sheikh Abdullah, the instrument of Bakshi, the presidential ordinances. So I think in some ways there isn't a great rupture, historically speaking, except that it was dramatically done on 2019, August 5th. Similarly, in terms of the state subject provisions, many of the provisions, while you might say that it was the manner in which it was announced was dramatic, but if you look at some of the provisions by, for instance, the issue of gender, the High Court, and within the Supreme Court also there was a case being fought, and through rather insidious means, there were state subject provisions which were being granted to even women who had married outside the state, which the original 35A, on the basis of the state subject laws introduced by the Maharaja, were not allowed. Similarly, in terms of lease of land to industrial houses, to the public sector undertakings, but to also private entities, was being given for for 40 years and 99 years. So actually, I would, in terms of ideology, there might have been a difference in terms of the fact that the BJP had clearly put 370 as part of its charter. But in terms of long-term strategy, wouldn't you say that there has been slow, incremental strategy of integration which has existed right from the time of Nehru onwards, from Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad's period till the 90s? Would you agree, Professor Rai?
Sorry, just Amitabh, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes,
I can hear you clearly, but I would like to see you also, but unless you...
Right there.
Okay.
Is there?
Thanks, Amitabh. I mean, there are other issues that trouble me, as you might imagine. This revocation has come at a time when since 2014, we've been hearing increasing hype or hyping of the rhetoric of citizenship, and I'm not talking about the CAA, but within the state, we've heard demands made by at least the units of a particular party in Jammu, about sort of the dangers posed by almost an inundation of of Muslim elements, and they keep pointing to the Rohingyas, and it's a small number of Rohingyas who've settled in Jammu through a very long, strange process. So the abrogation of 35A and questions of citizenship have been dealt with, first of all, rather ham-fistedly, but in a particular context where there have been these demands made for keeping the Rohingyas and other Bangladeshi Muslims out, whoever they may be, and also giving state subjects rights to the Hindus and Sikhs who came in 1947. So it's a context in which, I find it very, very difficult to see this abrogation as being part of a long, gentle history of assimilation. Do you see what I mean, Amitabh?
Yeah, no, I understand. And I understand the concerns that you reflect. And of course, I mean, that's the manner in which it was done and the manner in which it was presented uh, as something dramatic, and also the context, and as you pointed out, the other parts of the so-called citizenship package does lend itself to a much more different explanation, or a concerning, or a much more, I think, much deeper concerns about what has happened. But I was just trying to be in some ways counterintuitive and suggesting, and you probably understand this better than most other people, given your understanding of the history of Jammu and Kashmir. But I think we should probably have this conversation offline at some stage. Similarly, this question by Mohisul Zaman Saab, Imran Khan has said that once the lockdown measures are taken down, there will be a bloodbath. Again, frankly speaking, what is the it's counterintuitive, but it does. The fact that you had these, you might say there was fear and there was a sense of tremendous apprehension, but so surely these district development council polls were just not manufactured polls. I mean, there were people who came out and voted in these elections. There was a mobilization which happened, and there was a percentage of votes. It's surprising. I would have imagined that there would have been a large-scale boycott, but it may, and there are people who offer a variety of explanation that they wanted to keep the BJP out, they wanted to keep the other party, some other parties out, and that's why people came out in the number. So I'm not sure that this whole idea that there would be a bloodbath, it hasn't. Maybe there is, there is obviously disaffection, and there is a subterranean level of alienation which continues to exist, but it's not so patently obvious to me that there will be a large-scale mobilization of the scale that you saw in the 90s, at least not from the time that I spent in Kashmir during much of the lockdown. Perhaps Moises Zaman Saab can reflect on or expand on this question a little more for me to get understanding of what he actually means.
Meanwhile, Temina, would you respond to a question which has been addressed to you by same gentleman, Mr. Moises Zaman?
Yeah, so the question here is, how do you feel with the abrogation of Article 370? So I'm slightly glad that you're into a zeal to know what my personal stand is. But I would necessarily say what my personal stand is would not advocate for the people sitting there. What might seem normal for me might not be normal for other people. So talking about the abrogation of Article 370, strategically it might have some challenges or some advantages as well. I think the people who have passed the law know better. But personally, if you ask me, the one thing that has bothered me that it was slightly passed in a hush-hush manner, and that's the personal stand I have about it. Other than that, do you feel the revocation of Article 370 makes you or any ordinary Kashmiri feel more connected with Greater India? Talking about me, I was very connected to India from childhood. So again, I am not advocating for any person. I don't know, do they feel connected on it? They might not be. And I think it is too early to decide, because only 1 year since abrogation, and it has been a pandemic also, and we were stuck in a situation where nothing was done, and we were not able to do anything because of the pandemic and the other situation also. So yeah, I think it's too early to decide that who will be more connected to India or not. And in fact, any one of us, if doesn't feel connected to India, we're still living in India. We can't just revocate that fact. So on personal basis, it does make a difference. For other people, I might not like to advocate. Thank you.
Professor Mattoo, would you respond to another question, though it has been asked to all the panelists? What strategy exists to increase the per capita income of Kashmiris, and what strategy is being thought of to give reparations to Kashmiri Hindus forced out of their homes?
I don't know. I mean, what strategy exists to increase the per capita income of the Kashmiris? Uh, frankly, I mean, there's apart from, I guess, attempts to make, I mean, the traditional um, sectors that have flourished in Kashmir have been, I mean, the backbone of the economy is horticulture. And there were a large number of private initiatives to, including by one fantastic innovator, entrepreneur, to have increased the yield of the Kashmiri apple and high density, uh, quick, quick fruit, greater yield, delicious apples, and that has revolutionized some of the plantations in South Kashmir. Tourism has suffered tremendously in the last year. The government is the per capita employment by the government is the highest in Kashmir. I mean, government cannot even raise revenues to pay the salaries of its employees. So I mean, it's obviously given that since 2019 and the COVID pandemic, normal life has not been restored. So I don't think that there is a sense that the quality of life has improved dramatically over this period. But if there are long-term measures to ensure that there is greater skill development, more investment, then perhaps that will yield results. But that's not patently obvious. There was another question on common resistance. You see, apart from the 4G, where does the lockdown? That's the question. I mean, there are a large number of people who are still interned, but where is the lockdown measures evident? I mean, this is a genuine question to Moises Zaman Saab. Where is where would you find expressions of that lockdown now? I mean, I know that parts of the press, for instance, are perhaps censoring themselves. But where is the ordinary Kashmiri's sense of lockdown? Apart from the fact that people complain about 4G, but that's only with mobile phones. Otherwise, you can get access to those who can afford it through geo optical fibers. Most middle class Kashmiris have access to internet, which is as fast as it is anywhere in the country. And when I make assertions like this, I'm making them on the basis of personal example, because I was accessing Zoom and I was doing teaching through Zoom through geofiber. The MTNL is much slower, but mobile telephones you can't get high quality bandwidth. But I couldn't see the expressions of the lockdown anywhere else. So when you say there is a lockdown and that there's no curfew at the moment, separatists seem to be unusually quiet. As I said, there might be this latent sense of fear, and once that fear goes away, there might be a sense of resentment on the streets. But it's not patently obvious to me why there isn't, as most people had predicted, much greater protests on the streets, given how much has been made out of the revocation of Article 370 and 35A.
What is the perception in Australia or in the western part, in the West, about the whole issue? There is a bit of propaganda. There's human rights lobbies everywhere have been a little vocal. To what extent it is based on I would say, some motivated this thing by Pakistani side. But as you pointed it out, people participated, and they participated on their own in these polls. So this bogey of repression as such in the valley, to what extent do you think it is there, and to what extent it is motivated?
Melbourne is an unusual place, so no one's actually. It's not stereotypical of anything. So it's cut away, and it's not really bothered about what's happening. People are bothered about China, and most importantly, they're bothered about COVID, and the pandemic has overwhelmed us everywhere. I can't say that might be not. I think the United States or United Kingdom may be different, and that's why I think those who are more familiar with that might be a better place. Quite clearly, I mean, you should work on the assumption that Pakistan will try and exploit the situation as much as it can through the social media, for the media. That's a kind of given, considering the zero-sum game on Kashmir that's being played out. So that's a given. As I said, when you have a sense of peace in Jammu and Kashmir, no matter what Pakistan does, whether it's Operation Gibraltar or other measures, Pakistan has not succeeded. Pakistan has succeeded when you've not been able to reach out, when you've not been able to arrive at an accommodation. Pakistan was not able to do much during the period of the Accord till the rigging of the elections in 87. From 74 to 87, from the Accord with Sheikh Abdullah to the elections of 87, there was relative peace in Jammu and Kashmir. Most of the militant groups, the Al-Fatah, etc., hardly had a role to play in Kashmir's politics. So I think the best way of answering Pakistan is not just by countering it in various NGOs or diplomatic fora, is by ensuring that this slightly uneasy calm that prevails becomes an easy calm. Now, as I said, I don't have a recipe. There's never been a quick recipe or a quick mantra. I think it requires a complex way of addressing and engaging with the people. I think everyone in this audience, whether it's Madhu Rai or Dulat or Balbir Arora or General Gurmit Singh, has his own understanding, as do you, Mr. Oja. So I think it's a combination of diplomacy, force, political engagement, development, understanding the concerns, needs, and that will work. Frankly, I'm not an absolutist, but I think much more needs to be done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Amitabh, for joining. And it must be around midnight over there. We will let you go. And
8 p.m. So we are still not.
No, I understand, and we cannot say how grateful we are. There are some other observations and questions. I shall answer some questions addressed to me later on.
Yeah, there's some. I think we can come to. There's a question for you, Mr. Oja. We can come to that.
I will answer to that towards the end, but I would like one last question. Is there, Amitabh, Professor Amitabh? You missed it out about some compensation for Hindus who are forced to leave Valley.
I think the best compensation for the Hindus, and in some ways for everyone in Jammu and Kashmir, would be that if Kashmiri Pandits were to return to Jammu and Kashmir and return with dignity. I remember one of the first conversations that Mufti Muhammad Syed Saab, when he was Chief Minister, had. He asked me to organize it. He says, I want to talk to the Kashmiri Pandits, but I want to talk to the right wing of the Kashmiri Pandits. I want Kashmiri Pandits who identify closely with the RSS and the Sangh Parivar to meet me. So it was a challenge, but we organized a lunch in Kashmir House through the good offices of Mr. Ram Madhav, and you had a section of the Kashmiri Pandits there. And his opening statement was to the Kashmiri Pandits. He says, look, everything I'll say is off the record, and I'm saying it now that he's no longer with us. He said, we've lost out much more than you did. Frankly, he says, आप आबाद हो गए हैं, हम बर्बाद हो गए हैं. You have gone out, and although you have this sense of desolation and loss, but you have prospered. But look at us, we lost you, and we've lost our moorings. And only I understand the importance of a diversity, because a diversity is able to temper a majority. He was making a point which is true about Jammu and Kashmir, but he was also making a point which is probably true about the larger sense of the idea of India. There was a certain way forward. People talked about how they could think of steps for the return of Jammu and Kashmir. I think ultimately, as I said, for both Muslims and Pandits, it's not reparations. The loss is much more than material. It's a loss of a certain common identity, a certain common way of life, and that can only be compensated if there is an attempt, a genuine attempt at reconciliation, and a genuine attempt made for at least a section of the Pandits to return to Kashmir.
Appreciate Professor Amitabh. Once again, we'll keep engaging you. And to move forward, Ambassador Gupta would like to make some observation. Please, Ambassador, go ahead. Thank you, Amitabh, Professor Amitabh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I missed out part of the debate because I was busy elsewhere. But
Please.
I would like to mention, taking the last thread from Amitabhji Mattoo, that India represents a civilization which is, which has been built over centuries, where all the religions, all the sects, all the ethnicities are represented. And any attempt...
Sir, I will request you to be very focused. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll request you to be very focused. You have 1 minute to make your observation.
Yeah,
please.
so I would suggest that, Kashmir should also be representative of the same diversity of India, which is there in rest of the India. Any movement based on only on the religious ground will not hold good, and that is what has been proved over time and again. There are some periodic extremist activities, but on the whole, I get a sense that the people of the Kashmir want peace, they want stability, and they want coexistence.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, sir. How can Kashmir move forward from here? And what can be done to compensate Kashmiri Pandits who are forced to leave the valley?
I think, I thought I'd answered this question, but you raised the issue of Kashmiri Pandits. Yeah, that's a separate matter. But I think this question of accommodation of Kashmiri Pandits has been going on ever since they left the valley, or almost ever since then. And so various successive governments have promised a lot of things, but nothing has happened. Nothing has been done. And this present government also had made promises that the Kashmiri Pandits would be brought back. I think the solution lies in the Pandits coming back to their homeland and being welcomed by the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And I had suggested this some time ago, that the best way to do it was by the so-called separatists appeal, asking for the Pandits to return, because they are the most maligned in the valley. So some Pandits did make an appeal at different times. And governments which have been in power in J&K have also made these appeals, but they remain all in the air, Nothing happens thereafter. So I think it's a two-way thing. That one is that there has to be seriousness on the part of both the government of India and the government of Jammu and Kashmir, as well as the Kashmiri pundits. They must feel comfortable and safe to go back. So I don't think this is a particularly good time when Kashmir itself is in turmoil. There have been better times and we've not been able to do it. But I'm not trying to say that they should be put in the background or the back burner, but it's an issue which needs to be addressed. But I think the larger issue of Kashmir also needs to be addressed, There's what's going on in Kashmir now. And, I think, Jitendra, you mentioned at the very outset in your inaugural conversation or address that there is this issue of minorities, and it's not minorities just in Jammu and Kashmir, but it's minorities in the country as well. So when we talk about minorities in the country, then the crux of it lies actually in Jammu and Kashmir. And that's why I spoke about polarization. I think that is the most dangerous thing that could happen without people realizing it. It's bad enough. Jammu and Kashmir has been polarized, if you recall, going back to 2008, when this Amarnath land dispute occurred. And since then, apart from brief periods, there has been a sense of unease between Jammu and Kashmir. Now, that's why I mentioned that, in the recent DDC elections, the BJP getting 3 seats, I thought was a very positive thing in the valley. And likewise, the alliance of the PAGD getting 35 seats in Jammu also was significant. So I think there is more intermingling required between Jammu and Srinagar. And there is also this wrong belief that, 370 or 35A in particular affects only Kashmir. I think ultimately it will affect Jammu more than it affects Kashmir. And this whole polarization business always reminds me of, my guru, Professor Balraj Puri, who taught me a lot about Kashmir and J&K. And he was obsessed with what he referred to as what did he call it? Autonomy for regional autonomy. That's what he used to call it, regional autonomy. And it never, frankly, made full sense to me. What is the big deal about regional autonomy? If J&K could have autonomy, it would take care of all autonomy. But he said no. What is required is regional autonomy. And he once headed a committee and submitted a report also. But like most reports, that was thrown into the dustbin somewhere. But I think the point he was making was, and that is why I said 35 seats of the alliance in Jammu is significant. And no amount of delimitation is going to change that. And the point was that if it is going to be polarization, and if it's going to be Hindu versus Muslim, and the Muslims of Jammu join with the Muslims of the valley, then we will have more extreme polarization. So regional autonomy made more sense to him, that regions should be identified more than religion. Whether we agree to it, whether we face it or not, Jammu and Kashmir has, from the very outset, been a religious issue also. But fortunately, religion in Kashmir is the softest kind of Islam, the Sufi Islam. And that is why Kashmiriyat has survived for so many years in Jammu and Kashmir. And one has to hope that no matter how much radicalization has occurred of late, like the general was also referring to it, but despite that, the Kashmiri still is committed to a certain level of Kashmirian. Kashmiris are special, and Kashmiris are all one, irrespective of their religion. That's the kind of situation it is. It's not easy. There are no easy this thing. That's why I say that if you have a permanent engagement between Delhi and Srinagar, and Delhi and Jammu, and Srinagar and Jammu, and I am leaving out Islamabad for the time being, then we could be making a beginning, but it has to be like my friend Manishankar Iyer often quotes a dialogue that continues, without interruption. What does he call it? Uninterruptible and uninterrupted and uninterruptible dialogue. So something like that, engagement.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time and very enlightening words you brought in and added so much of weight to this event. We were supposed to conclude it at 6 p.m., but it has exceeded. One last question is there, whether it is addressed to me, whether India has been unsuccessful in connecting to the Kashmiri community to the extent that they have exploited, is there by Moin Zaman. I think this perception that India has exploited, I think, is a little misplaced because of, let me tell you, the percentage of central aid to Kashmir is far higher to the population, and the kind of sacrifices generals also mentioned the Indian security forces have made to defend and protect people of Kashmir. As we mentioned earlier, this is a very complicated kind of war. It is very easy to wage this war, but very difficult to conclude. And external actors have nothing to offer here. Dulat Saab mentioned in the beginning how Kashmiris also acknowledge that Pakistanis had nothing to offer. And we 100% agree with you, sir. We believe here, or individually I believe, Islamabad has absolutely no locus standi as far as Kashmir is concerned. They have to be kept permanently out. And if possible, we have been saying at this foundation that there has to be some humanization of even Pakistan as such, so that normal people over there can live peacefully rather than their military syndicate hoodwinking them in the name of Kashmir. So with these words, we come to conclusion of this event. I request Soham to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jitendra Kumar Roja, Distinguished Advisor, Tillotoma Foundation. I also thank all the members of audience and the friends from media who have joined us. My special thanks to the keynote speaker for today, Mr. A.S. Dulat, for being here with us and delivering the keynote address. My special thanks to Ms. Temina Rizvi. My thanks to Professor Amitabh Mattoo, and of course, the two generals, Lieutenant General Gurmit Singh and Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain. My thanks to all the other distinguished members who are here and who has helped in putting this together. Thank you all.